Hello, and welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Thank you for joining us. Each week, we'll focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and in the diaspora, as well as the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Nicole Zedek. Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Donald Trump picked billionaire space enthusiast Jared Isaacman as the new leader of NASA. The 41-year-old entrepreneur made headlines earlier this year on board Elon Musk's SpaceX rocket, becoming the first ever private citizen to perform a spacewalk. He's the first Jew to hold this position since Daniel Goldin took charge of the space agency in 1992. Charges against a New York rabbi accused of running over pro-Palestinian protesters at Columbia University have been dropped. Reuven Kahana, who has no relation to the infamous politician Meir, he was accused of assault after police said he, quote, tapped a protester with his car outside the university in May this year. The case was dropped after it took too long to reach a trial. More than 30,000 Brits have braved Storm Dara to march through London, protesting the rise of anti-Semitism in the UK. The march concluded in Parliament Square, where Jewish speakers and non-Jewish allies spoke out, condemning both current and former British government for turning a blind eye against anti-Semitism. A poll by Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics reveals 70% of Israeli Jews feel a connection to Jews living abroad. The poll also noted an interesting correlation between the level of religiousness and the strength of connection with diaspora Jews, with 92% of ultra-Orthodox respondents, 86% of religious Jews, 70% of traditional Jews, and 61% of secular Jews in Israel answering they feel part of the Jewish people living abroad to a great or moderate extent. Only 12% felt little connection, and another 12% reported feeling no connection at all. And finally, Andorra, the micro-nation hidden in the Pyrenees between France and Spain, now have its first ever full-time rabbi. Chabad announced that Kuti Kalmanson and his family will serve as the emissary to the less than 100 Jews permanently living in the country and the hundreds who visit every year. Andorra doesn't allow houses of worship that aren't Catholic, but there is a Jewish community center there which hosts events on Shabbat and the high holidays. Now, those are the top 5 stories in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
The Jewish community of Melbourne, Australia woke up on Friday morning to horrific news that Melbourne's Adass Yisrael synagogue was set ablaze in what police are calling a terror attack. Fortunately, only one person was injured as the attack happened before Friday night Shabbat services. That said, Australians are fearful over the rise in anti-Semitic incidents throughout the country. Here's more from I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown.
An attack on a synagogue and an attack on Australia's Jewish community.
There's no place in Australia for an outrage such as this. To attack a place of worship is an attack on Australian values. To attack a synagogue is an act of anti-Semitism.
At 4 a.m. local time on Friday, hours before worshippers were set to arrive for morning prayers, Melbourne's Adass Israel synagogue was set ablaze by vandals who, according to eyewitnesses, threw firebombs at the site. But despite the early hour, people were present.
There were unfortunately injuries this morning. You need to understand that this is a very active and busy synagogue. It's a place of prayer and it's a place of study. And there were people here at 4:15 in the morning when the attack occurred who were engaging in quiet, prayerful study, as is their right and the right of every Australian.
In total, one person was injured, and huge damage was caused to the interior of the synagogue. Adass Israel was founded in the 1960s by Holocaust survivors, and the synagogue featured 3 Torah scrolls that survived World War II in Hungary. These were luckily unharmed in the fire. But Australia has had its issues with anti-Semitism, especially over the last year.
We have been warning about the risk of this for the last year since 7 October.
In the year from October 2023 to October 2024, 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents were reported in Australia, more than 4 times the amount in the preceding year. In response to this, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has appointed an anti-Semitism czar and has offered moral and financial support to the Jewish community.
Well, anti-Semitism is something that has been around for a long period of time, of course. But anti-Semitism has been on the rise. We call it out wherever we see it. We've appointed and I spoke with Gillian Siegel, our anti-Semitism envoy, this morning as well. We've taken action of providing increased support and security funding for Jewish organisations.
But many within the Jewish community do not believe this has gone far enough. Jeremy Liebler, president of the Zionist Federation of Australia, said that whilst the government isn't actively trying to promote anti-Semitism, quote, there is a correlation between the failure of leadership in Australia and what we are seeing. Victoria State has pledged hundreds of thousands of dollars for the restoration of the synagogue, but the Jewish community of Melbourne, just like many Jewish communities around the world, remains on edge, hoping for the best, but fearing the worst.
We're now going to be joined live from Melbourne with Alon Casuto, the CEO of the Zionist Federation of Australia. Good evening to you, 9 hours ahead of us.
Good evening, Marianne. How are you?
Doing well, and thank you for joining us. And again, I mean, we are all sorry watching everything that unfolded. It was just a horrific and a huge, hit in the gut for the very robust Jewish community of Melbourne and also all of Australia. How are you holding up as a community now?
Look, Marianne, the community's shocked and devastated and heartbroken, but not entirely surprised. We've seen escalations over the past 14 months, and we've been slowly becoming used to this rising anti-Semitism, which is terrifying because, I mean, this community that was attacked, this act of terror, as it's now been called, is on a synagogue that has existed there as the center of the Adass community for over 70 years, a community that's mostly made up of Holocaust survivors who fled the burnings of synagogues in Europe, in 1930s Europe. And of course, we all know how that ended up. And so it's a terrifying and very triggering event. We had to see images of Torah scrolls being taken out of the synagogue, burnt. There'll be 5 Torah scrolls that need to be buried. It's horrific images. And of course, we're grateful that no one was injured, but it doesn't really mask the fact that this is the worst attack that the Australian Jewish community has known. And it's come at a time where we've been crying out for stronger leadership. We've been crying out for stronger messaging and actions from our leaders, because for 14 months now, we've been seeing these radical elements really emboldened because of a lack of action and a lack of leadership in Australia. And so the community is heartbroken, but not surprised.
Right. And, I have lots of friends in the Melbourne Jewish community, and I know that, even it was percolating even as far back, as a time of COVID. So again, not surprising, especially people in the government. So some are blaming your prime minister that you just talked about. I mean, has he fueled this rhetoric?
Look, the prime minister has recently pledged $32 million in security measures for the Jewish community. He has appointed an anti-Semitism task force in the federal police to try and tackle these acts of terror. But it's all been seen by our community as small gestures too late, and certainly 14 months on, after we've seen weekly rallies that are calling to globalize the Intifada and saying that all Zionists are terrorists, when of course Zionist is being used as code word for Jewish. Because the vast majority of Australian Jews consider themselves Zionists. Right. And so the Jewish community feels quite abandoned in a sense, and a real vacuum in leadership from the federal government. And of course, we've seen the federal government move further and further away from Israel.
We were talking earlier about the Torah scrolls and the fact that it was a synagogue built by Holocaust survivors. I mean, this is one thing that the world maybe doesn't know. I know you guys are very, very far away from so many places, but it is the largest outside of Israel population of people that did flee the Shoah. So the history in that time, letting in Jews to see this shift has just got to be so painful, especially as we're dealing with the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those survivors.
Yeah, listen, the Melbourne community and the Australian community as a whole is an incredible, incredible community. We've got brilliant schools and synagogues and community organizations and a real beautiful fabric and tapestry of Jewish life here. And it's existed since the beginning of Australia as a modern nation. So even before the Holocaust, but certainly post-Holocaust, these communities came alive. And the challenge with that is that second, third generation Holocaust survivors have grown up with the stories of their grandparents fleeing the ashes of Europe, seeking a better life. And we've had this beautiful golden era for Jewry in Australia that people are now fearing is drastically coming unraveled, and it's a sad reality. And so our community is unified, our community is strong, our community is not giving up on Jewish life in Australia. Certainly we're fighting for it with everything we've got, as well as for our beloved connection with Israel. And we see the relationship and the friendship between Australia and Israel as something we have to fight for. And even in these challenging times, we're so proud of the fact that we've sent 500 young Jewish Australians to Israel on short and long-term Israel programs. We've got thriving schools. We've got beautiful celebrations of Jewish life. I just came now from a function from my old school, Mount Scopus College, where we had Tzipi Livni come and address a crowd of thousands of people. So there's, and Eden Golan as well, the Eurovision performer. So there is still a beautiful Jewish life here that is worth fighting for and worth preserving.
All right. Thank you very much, Alon Cassuto, CEO of the Zionist Federation of Australia. Much appreciated. And we're there with you, even if we're several oceans away.
Thank you so much, Marianne.
Ireland's relationship with Israel has been fraught with animosity for decades. Many there feel their history and struggles parallel those of the Palestinian people. Ireland was occupied by the British, leading to the creation of the Irish Republican Army, who committed multiple terror attacks against their so-called British occupiers. This was only exacerbated following the October 7th massacre, with multiple pro-Palestinian protesters hitting the streets of Dublin, and also a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incidents during this past year. Joining us live now via Zoom is Dana Ehrlich, Israel's ambassador to Ireland. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Abby.
So we miss you here in Israel, and you assumed this position just a few weeks before October 7th. I could only imagine what that was like for you for this to happen as you're in your new post.
Yes, we all know the challenges that hosting in Ireland brings, but unfortunately what we've seen throughout this year since the war started has been concerning deterioration of the relations, with the increase of anti-Israeli and anti-Semitism rhetorics and initiatives from the government, from the media, and just a general hostile atmosphere that is concern for us and the Jewish and Israeli communities in Ireland.
Of course. So also similarly, an American Jew was in a bar, attacked in Dublin after being called out for being Jewish. So obviously with that, and we saw what happened in Amsterdam a few weeks ago, are these incidents becoming more violent and scary?
We are concerned about all of it, not just for the physical manifestation and the student that was attacked just for being Jewish, and he was confronted, are you Jewish? And then it was attacked by several people. Incidents that only days before, people in Ireland told me with regards to what happened in Amsterdam, that can never happen in Ireland. And I was skeptical of that, saying that unfortunately what we've seen in the past years and what we've repeatedly said of never again, we are now seeing how quickly hatred spreads again. And those manifestations are not just the physical. We've seen the hatred that is bringing fear into the lives of the Jewish and Israeli communities. We see people afraid of speaking Hebrew, of wearing anything that will identify them as Israelis or Jewish people. And this is something that I think not only us in Israel should be concerned about, but should concern Ireland as well.
Right. And a question, with all of this and also the political, component of this, the cause, what would it take? I mean, you have a tough job ahead of you. I mean, what would it take, or how do you go about changing their many decades-long perception of Israel?
I think the first step when we combat anti-Semitism is admitted that there is anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, we don't see Ireland officials acknowledging that increase. This is a concern on its own. The second step is identifying what is anti-Semitism, which also in Ireland is not, they have not adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. So that is another important steps, which are very trivial and basic, but we call on the Irish government to adopt.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and keep doing your good work over in Ireland. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Now we're going to Romania, where last week the Romanian embassy in the U.S. held a special ceremony to honor 3 American Jewish leaders who spent decades fighting anti-Semitism. This comes after Romanian Jews have been fearing the rise because of right-wing politician Călin Georgescu, who won the first round of the presidential election, but the Constitutional Court annulled this first round due to fears of Russian interference. We're now going to go to Washington, D.C., where we are joined by I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim. Hello, Mike, and tell us why this event is such a milestone.
Emily, it comes at such an extraordinary time right now in Romanian politics and in U.S.-Romanian relations. Just last week at the ambassador's residence here in Washington, the Romanian ambassador to the U.S. honoring these 3 American Jewish leaders, Dan Mariashin from B'nai B'rith International, Rabbi Andrew Baker from the American Jewish Committee, and Mark Levin, who's been helping Soviet Jewry and then former Soviet Jewry for decades now, building up a U.S.-Romania relationship. Why Romania in particular? Well, Romania has been a key, obviously, for a long time now in separating from that former Eastern Bloc and forming a line of defense for America and for the West, part of building up U.S.-Romania relations involving bringing Romania into NATO. Well, what had to happen in order for Romania to be brought into NATO? They're not. It didn't happen because they're a military powerhouse. In order to do so, there had to be other reasons: shared values, shared culture. Well, part of that shared values, shared culture meant disavowing itself from its past as a haven for Nazis, for far-right leaders, for anti-Semites, and that's where American Jewry came in. American Jewry helped to build that bridge, to help Romania explore its past through things like the Weasel Commission, which laid out recommendations for how to move forward out of the shadow of its anti-Semitic past, out of its Holocaust and Nazi collaborating past. And this is where these particular leaders came in. Let's hear from Dan Mariashin, one of the recipients of the National Order of Merit Award, a rare award given out by the Romanian government last Tuesday. Here's Dan Mariashin from B'nai B'rith International talking about the building of those bridges.
Many of us had lived through the era of the Eastern Bloc, of communism in Eastern Europe, of the Soviet Union, and we knew there was a window, and that window might not be open for a long time. So when that window opened and we were looking for ways to help to ensure the health of these new democracies, it made good sense to say, well, look, NATO is one way of allowing these countries to get firmly anchored in the democratic way and with the West. And I think that not only in the case of Romania, but in the case of other countries as well, the decision by some of the Jewish organizations to become active and to advocate for membership in NATO was the right one for sure.
But of course, Emily, there are people that want to see Romania disassociated from the West, to break away from NATO. One of them happened to be Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, who wants NATO broken up in the worst possible way. And one of the ways, apparently, at least according to the Romania Constitutional Court, he's been trying to do it is through disrupting the Romanian elections for prime minister. Now, Colin Georgescu, you mentioned him at the top, came out of nowhere, far-right politician with ties, with the glorification of former Nazi heroes, former heroes, at least for the Nazis during the Holocaust, calling them martyrs, praising them. Very, very disconcerting, not only to the Romanian Jewish community, but to Jewish communities worldwide. Now, Georgescu was the favorite for the runoff of that prime minister election just a couple days ago, back on Sunday. However, the Constitutional Court of Romania stepped in and said there has been interference, there's been Russian meddling in the election, especially online, and they canceled the result of the first election, and now kind of a crisis in Romania right now. But Andrew Baker, Rabbi Andrew Baker of the American Jewish Committee, another Jewish leader here in America who's been involved in building Romanian relations for the longest time now, spoke to us, receiving his award on Tuesday as well, talking about the state of affairs right now in Romanian politics and kind of where we go from here. Keep in mind, these comments were before the Constitutional Court canceled the elections, but very relevant nevertheless. Here's Andrew Baker.
We happened to gather between the two elections for president, the first round, which brought forward a candidate that makes all of us troubled and nervous, someone who really stands for the very opposite of all these things we've had worked about. I think the government, which will be formed based on the parliamentary elections, will need to be the bulwark to support democracy and Western orientation, even if this man should win the presidency. But we will see if, in fact, that happens.
I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, thank you very much. As volunteers from all over the world continue to come to Israel to show support during these times of war, one woman from Gaza from the envelope has been opening her home, giving volunteers from the Jewish National Fund USA a space to come together and cook for the soldiers. Here's more from I-24 News correspondent Nicole Zedek in Ofakim.
If you have big heart, so everything can get inside. This is what I believe. My house, my home, it's always open.
O.C. Lancry has been welcoming volunteers from Jewish National Fund USA to her home in Ofakim for years.
And while the American people start to come and host in my house, I always say they're coming and saying, thank you for hosting us. And I'm saying, no, thank you for coming. Because when you are coming, you are bringing us the reason to wake up in the morning and to cook and to prepare and to make good things.
She's helped feed more than 3,000 soldiers since the Gaza war started last year.
They are fighting for us. They are making all for us that I can be in my house. In Ofakim, it's not so obvious that I can be in my house. So Ofakim, at the 7th of October, got a big attack. 51 people murdered in Ofakim in 7th of October.
O.C. says her story with Hamas started well before that dark Saturday.
This rocket fell down here, as you see there, 5 years ago. This rocket has 5-second delay. It means that it's supposed to go during a building and then to explode. It gets down under the floor, under the ground here, 10 meters inside, and then it explodes. Nothing happened around here. This is our miracle, this rocket.
The rocket was so deep in the ground that her home miraculously wasn't damaged at all. But she still keeps the hollowed-out metal as a reminder, especially to those visiting her home.
I said, okay, now I'm small O.C. from Ofakim, small city in Israel. What I'm asking for you, when you're going back home, tell my story. Tell the story of Ofakim, of Israel, what you have here, what you're doing, to tell the real story to continue to move it to other people, this is the important.
In my view, it is critical for people who care about Israel, who love Israel, and who are proud to be Jewish to come. It's wonderful to support Israel in so many ways that people do, but to actually be here in the land, volunteering, participating in projects, spending time with Israelis, showing the Israeli people how much we love them, how much we care. There's nothing like physically being here.
And being able to help, even if it's just one meal.
What we're doing tonight is going directly to feed soldiers in Gaza.
A home-cooked meal that's going straight into a war zone.
Also, these soldiers have been away from home for so long. So when you're making this for them and you're giving them a little taste of home, how does that make you feel?
Like I'm making for my own son. It's the same.
Along with 200 fresh-made sandwiches, donuts, and chocolate cakes, a blood drive was set up outside as well.
These guys that come over here only will be with us. They don't ask nothing. They just come to help us, even donate their blood over here. It's amazing.
While the firefighters and residents of Ofakim are grateful for the American volunteers, that feeling of awe is certainly shared.
It just enhances your love of Judaism and enhances, how you feel about Israel and the people. And, you're all one. You're proud. We're proud to be.
Reporting in Ofakim, Nicole Zedek for I-24 News.
The heart and the soul and the spirit lives on. And that is all that we have for this week on Jewish World Weekly. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Emily Francis. Shalom from Tel Aviv, and we'll see you back here again next week.